Hey artists! In this video we're going to talk about our beehive art project. We're going to be using a ruler, we're going to be using hexagon stencils, and a pencil and a pen to start off our drawing. So I use the ruler to make a border, and then I erase the corners, and then I start to trace the hexagon stencil using just a pencil because I want to make sure I put them in spots that I like them, and I can erase them if I do them in pencil first. After I trace some hexagons onto the paper, I make sure that I like the way that the composition looks. So you don't have to fully fill the entire rectangle with hexagons. Then you can use a Sharpie marker to outline everything that we've done in the pencil so far. So really take your time to carefully trace your outlines. I used an ultra fine point so that it's almost like drawing with a pen. So make sure that you outline very carefully, doing your best to stay inside of the line. Then you can use an eraser, and then we're going to start filling it up with patterns. So each one of the hexagons is going to be filled with a pattern, and the first pattern that I do is just little tiny spirals in different sizes, trying to fill in the entire hexagon with spirals. Then I do a curved line that connects the middle of the sections into the center, and then I do a pattern with some straight lines looking for different intersections of lines. Then I did a flower by drawing petals from the center out to each one of the corners. Then I did a crescent bumping line just going around the edge and repeating that crescent motif until I reach the center of the hexagon shape, where I wound up filling it in with black. Then I did another pattern with a waving line that goes left and right, and added in some dots in between to fill in the space of the hexagon. Then I did a very traditional Zentangle pattern, which is called Knight's Bridge. It reminds me of the game Kerplunk, where you have one line overlapping, and every line that we wind up drawing is behind all of the other lines. I do that one with pencil first. Then I started doing more triangle patterns, so I broke the hexagon up into pie slices and then added more triangle shapes. Sometimes when you're drawing the patterns, it's nice to do it with pencil and then pen so that you can erase it. Then I started doing a pattern with just stripes, and then I went back to creating like a checkerboard, and then I added spirals inside of all of the squares made from the checkerboard. Other patterns that you could do, I used a curve, kind of like how I did the flower, but going all the way across, and then I added some shading in the middle. Then I did another pattern. This one's called tipple. It's where you do big and small dots overlapping in front of and behind each other. So the spaces that are around the outside edge are a little bit cropped, so you might want to keep those patterns a little bit more simple. So I just did diagonal lines, trying to keep them narrow, echoing lines, repeating that hexagon shape, adding more lines. So your patterns can repeat if you want to repeat one of the other patterns that you did, but I like to try and keep each one with a different type of design to make it look more interesting. So as you're working, I did another pattern with hearts. You can create your own patterns. You don't have to do the same patterns as me. I did like a very small waving line, kind of like waves in the ocean, just going up and down. Then I did a zigzag line pattern, just really trying to think of patterns that would be easy for these little tiny spaces, because when the pattern is too small, the area, it makes it harder to draw the pattern. So this one I just did little tiny stars, small polka dots, and then I did a pattern of like dashes and then dots and then dashes and then dots. So think about the type of marks that you'd like to make for your patterns. When you're all done with your patterns, you're going to start drawing the bees for your beehive. So when you're drawing the bee For your beehive, we're going to cut the legs out, so make sure that you give yourself some space and make them long enough so that you're not struggling after we go to cut them out. I draw them in pencil first, and then I outline them in a ultra fine point marker. Make sure to add stripes to the body, and to make them look fuzzy, I like to do stippling, little dashes on the thorax section, like the middle of the body. When I do the legs, sometimes I like to do scumbling, which is like a circles, like a curving line that is circles close together to fill in the arms and legs. And you're probably going to want to make a couple of bees for your artwork. Maybe 2, 3, 4, or 5 will keep your composition more interesting. Remember, we have to cut these bees out, so you should try to draw them a little bit bigger than a real life bee. This bee is probably like as big as my hand. You can kind of see as I'm cutting it. They are pretty large, so don't draw your bees very small, because cutting it out will be much harder. You have to be very careful when cutting around the legs, so I like to cut the bee out into like a square shape, and then cut from the outside in towards the body, the outside in towards the body, so that way it's easier for me to cut the scraps off without ripping my bee. Once you have cut out your bees, you can fold the legs, and it's going to make them pop up. That way they can stand. So you're going to want to make sure that you have 2 bees at least, so that their legs can be folded and they pop up. Your project will look like this. I can't wait to see what you create.